Alrighty guys, so I thought I would throw together a little tutorial or making a video of my Kassandra from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Before I started, I made a little duct tape mannequin of myself just so I could have a good base to heat the warbler to and to shape the armour that I was making. So once I had the mannequin done, I got the warbler, heat formed it on top of it. The duct tape mannequin wasn't actually perfect, so I ended up going in with a balloon and a heat gun just to even it out. And then with the stomach, I used a mannequin that I had around the house to get that stomach definition that I wanted. To make the back, I did a stupid thing and I lay down on the floor and got my mum to heat form it to my back because the mannequin again wasn't very good. I wouldn't recommend this at all. Not a smart thing to do. It worked kind of, but it was pretty risky. Would not recommend. Once the wobble was done, it was just a matter of duct taping and creating a pattern based off that so I could do a foam layer. Once the pattern's good, it was cut out of 2mm foam and then I'd use contact cement to attach it to the warbler piece. The most effective way to use contact cement is not what I'm doing. And thin, even layer will work sufficiently. I was just my contact cement was running low and it was very gluggy, so that's why it was coming out super thick. And because it was all going on anyway and it wasn't going to be seen, I wasn't too fussed with how messy it was. Trimmed all the edges, made sure it looked all good, and this is how it turned out. Pretty happy with it. It's looking pretty funky. It's a bit rough, but because it's going to be made to look like leather, it wasn't too big of a deal. So I used foam clay to fill in all the gaps and I put a bit of water with it to make it a bit more of a paste so it would go on smoother. I did dampen the area that I was putting it onto first as well, so it did stick to that foam. And once that was done, you just let it set for 24 to 48 hours. Once the foam clay was dry, I went in with my Dremel just to smooth it out. I didn't wear a mask because I'm an idiot. Definitely would recommend doing that also. This is just going to turn into a what not to do video. So definitely wear a mask because it's not safe to breathe in those dust foam particles. No, not good. Once that was all done, I drew on a pattern of what I was wanting, used my soldering iron to burn the shape in. I did make quite a few mistakes here, but because it was meant to look like leather and look damaged, I was just not too fussed. I was able to just sort of play it off with battle damage because that's what we always do. It's always battle damage. If you stuff something up, battle damage. I didn't account for the detail at the bottom of the armour when I made this and put the foam on, so I pulled it off and just used the Dremel to clean up my hideous glue situation there. It cleaned up pretty good though, so I wasn't too mad at it. I also just used my Dremel to add some extra details onto the torso as well. To do the ring details on the front, just heated up some warbler and rolled it out. Nothing too exciting or crazy. I probably could have just bought rings. Used my heat gun to heat seal the foam, and then I just made little loops and then glued them down with the rings that I had made through them to match the design. I used some extra warbler to add the detailing on the bottom of the armour. Just rolled some of it out and then stuck it on top of a flat piece that I made. And back to more soldering iron detailing. This was for the shoulder straps. I used a flat head on this one just so I could get a nice even indentation on this piece. I was pretty happy with how it looked, to be honest. It was a bit rough and messy, but because again, it's supposed to be leather, I wasn't too fussed. I think it had the feel that I wanted. To make all my armour pieces for my arms, I just traced my arm on a piece of paper because that's how I do, and then just eyeballed it based off designs that I was looking on the computer. So once I'd done that, I just tested it on my arm to see if I was happy with the proportion and sizing. If I wasn't, I would fix it up again. I also like to draw out my pieces that I'm working on just so I can get an idea of where I'd be putting the seams and where, like, a full view of what the piece would look like, just to break it down in my mind. And I just cut it all out of foam. It was, I'm pretty sure this was 2 or 4 or 3mm foam, I cannot remember. And then just did details, again that was all with 2mm foam, just to give it a little bit of a raised detail and texture. Just glued it all down. This time I used super glue because it was such small details and I was being lazy. Worked pretty good. If you're not wanting to cut corners though when you're making costumes, super glue isn't the best thing to use on foam, but it does do the job. Here comes just a little montage of me gluing things together. Super exciting, but it has to be done. I did this little nifty trick to make the edges of a foam piece look like leather eyes. I took my little scalpel and I was running it down the sides to sort of almost fluff them up a little bit and slicing into the foam just ever so slightly, and then doing some cuts here and there to sort of give it a really worn leather look, and I think it actually worked pretty well. But that's just me. I mean, you could think it looks crap and that's cool too. Cutting out one of the leg pieces, I just chucked my leg on the table. Then it was just a matter of drawing it out, putting it up on my leg to see if it worked, playing with the shape, cutting it open, fixing it. I like to sort of just freehand or drape a lot of what I do and then go with trial and error. Again, not the best way to do things, but effective. For the piece that goes all the way around the leg, I duct taped it all together so I could get the right shape, cut it all out, same way that I did the torso. This time just glued the pieces together. Wasn't too fussed about how this looked because I knew that I'd be putting a little bit of raised detailing over all the seams. And then I went in using foam clay to just smooth those out and make it look better. Really important part with time lapsing is to make sure that you get really stupid time lapses of yourself. It's going to be quality content. Everyone's going to love it. Instead of tracing around every individual piece, because this was quite a complicated piece, I just used a little snow spray can thing that you get that just wipes off to trace around it. Worked really well, was a lot quicker than drawing it all out. And then I just cut it out of 2mm foam and attached it to the 4mm foam, 3mm foam. Can't remember which one it was. Surprise, we have yet another dremeling montage, and quickly followed by a soldering montage of just adding little bits of detail here and there to parts that would go on the arm. I just glued all the pieces together. I did attach some warbler on there too, just to strengthen it and get it to keep its shape on the inside, because I didn't want it to change shape, but I was pretty happy with how that looked. I use googly eyes for rivets because they're perfect, and it means when you walk around and you shake it about, you get a funky little sound going. So I just freehanded the design that I wanted, then put some baking paper over it, and then put some water on the baking paper and foam clayed the design that I wanted onto it. I put the water on again just so that it didn't move around or not want to attach. It got pretty fiddly because the designs are pretty intricate but also small, but I did the same on the little faces that went on the shoulder pieces as well. You have my crappy little slow mode boomerang because I forgot to video me making these parts. Make the little medallion for her cloak, hood, what do you want to call it. I used just a flat piece of foam and then used my soldering iron to add the detailing in. And then for the center details, I'd just use some foam clay to get the shape that I wanted. I kind of freehanded or just eyeballed the skirt pattern based off the armour torso, and then held it up to my body before I cut anything out. It seemed to work pretty good. And then I just made a little template of the dangly hanging part, which has a name, I don't know what it is, and I just traced multiple of those out and then glued them together with contact cement. All the details I then put into this I used with the soldering iron with a really fine tip, and then I just ran the soldering iron across the edges of the leatherette to give it that leather look. I used my dress form to drape the underdress. Because it's predominantly not seen, I wasn't too fussed about making it perfect. And then I put it on and cut the shape that I want out of the bottom of it. Did a lot of test fitting. I just pinned it together at this point, but eventually I didn't do anything there and I pinned it together when I wore it on the day. Just a matter of gluing all of the skirt panels together with contact cement and then gluing down the flaps at the very top so they would still have a bit of swing to them but not too much. I used masking tape to sort of keep it in place, pulled it off, worked pretty good. I just pinned it on and then just pinned where I wanted the folds to be until I was happy, and then cut all of the trim off the edge of the gold that I had and sewed it on. To create the foam texture, I started just using a heat gun on some foil to press it in. Then I found it was more effective to put some foil on the tip of my soldering iron and press it on. It was actually really good. It gave it a fantastic texture that I was really happy with. Oof. But actually though, the soldering iron and foam combo worked really well to get the leather texture. I was really happy with how it looked. My favourite form of sealing foam is Plasti Dip. It works really well and it gives me a really good finish. You can use other stuff too. I know that there's all different types of ways to seal your foam, but this is my favourite. And then I just went in with some gold spray paint to get the gold, all those gold pieces covered. I did a little bit messy because that's just the kind of person I am. Once I finished with the gold spray paint, I moved straight on to the brown spray paint because spray paint's my favourite and it's a lot quicker and it's a good base to add on any other paint layers that you're wanting to do. I had a couple friends come around and help me paint it the night before the con because I left it all to the last minute, so I didn't actually film all of the painting process. I do have the base of it but not the actual detailing parts. I will probably make a video on how I did those in future, like just in painting my armour in general. But yeah, we just used acrylic paints to buff over it and to give it the best leathery look that we could give it. Get yourself friends who will sit in the rain with an umbrella and help you paint your stuff. To weather, I just used a black acrylic paint and went in with a sponge and a brush just to give it the looks that I wanted. To make the underlayer of one of the legs, I used some leatherette and then used some stretch lycra on the front just so I could pull it on and off my leg, and then just did some strips of leatherette around it, painted it to make it the right colour that I wanted. There are many effective ways to fasten armour pieces. What I did here was not the most effective. I wouldn't recommend it, but it did the job. So I just used hook and bars to get these pieces together. It was difficult to both put on and take off, but when it was on, it did stay in place. Just got some Kmart shoes and painted them, then add some extra straps here and there to give the look that I wanted. This is my assortment of straps that I made. To add those little details in, I actually just got some pins and just put them straight into that foam and then cut them off at the back. To make the arm straps, it was just some long pieces of red fabric, put those pieces on top, and then using those leather straps to keep it in place. So I used leather for this and then painted it grey and wrapped it around my arm, and then used a leather cord to attach. To make all the belts, it was just, again, 2 layers of leatherette glued to each other, and then I just put some split pins in and painted it, and then had some rings on the ends so I could connect them where they needed to be connected. So I frayed all the edges of this to really give it a weathered look and to make it as close to the reference image as possible. And then I stuck that little medallion right in the middle. I didn't actually attach the hood to the other part just because in the game it doesn't always have the hood on it, so I wanted to keep it optional for myself. It's kind of messy, but it kind of also just worked for the aesthetic of the costume, so I wasn't too fussed. And I would just tuck that front piece under the other part so that you couldn't tell it was there. Just a bit of a detailing on the painting that I didn't show you how I did it, but just went in and used puffy paint to create little raised details and then painted them gold to make them look a bit like rivets. To fasten these pieces together, I just glued some little straps there and used rings and tied it up. It's exactly how it's done in the game, so I was pretty stoked that it actually worked. So the shoulder pieces are attached to the front, and then just using Velcro at the back to keep them in place. Ta-da! That is the armour. To weather it, because I had used spray paint on the inside of all the leather skirt, it actually just wore off on the day and just perfectly weathered it itself, which was a fluke. It could have been so much worse, but I was pretty happy with how it looked. Added some little details here and there to the skirt to match the design. I then fastened it with eyelets. And that is the costume.